The rain lashed against the panoramic windows of the penthouse office, mirroring the tempest brewing within Alistair Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with ruthless acquisition and glacial indifference. His heart, they whispered in the hushed corridors of global finance, was a fortress built of obsidian and tempered steel, utterly impenetrable. Yet tonight, as he stared down at the glittering, rain-slicked tapestry of the city spread beneath him a kingdom, he largely commanded a flicker of something unwelcome, something resembling irritation tinged with a strange, sharp curiosity, pierced the usual calm for Wade. It was all because of the woman downstairs, tucked away in the lower echelons of Thorne Industries' vast corporate structure, a woman named Elara Vance, whose very existence seemed to be a deliberate, infuriating anomaly in his meticulously ordered universe. Alistair Thorne, at 35, possessed the kind of raw, intimidating handsomeness that often accompanies absolute power, sharp jawline, eyes the color of deep, glacial ice that rarely betrayed emotion, and a presence that could silence a boardroom with a single, measured breath. He had clawed his way to the apex of the corporate world, not through inheritance, but through sheer, relentless will and an almost terrifying aptitude for predicting market movements. A skill he now found utterly useless in predicting the impact of one small, stubborn individual. Elara Vance was an architect, technically, working in the mid-level design department, tasked with the decidedly unglamorous job of optimizing logistical layouts for Thorne's new sustainable energy complex in the outskirts of the city, a project that demanded precision and absolute adherence to budget, to qualities Alistair valued above all others, and to qualities Elara, surprisingly, possessed in spades. But it was not her competence that snagged his attention, it was her defiance, a subtle, almost imperceptible resistance that only someone as attuned to control as Alistair could detect. Their first true interaction, months ago, had been a terse, 6-minute exchange in a preliminary meeting where Elara, barely 28, her dark hair usually tied back severely, her eyes a startling shade of hazel that seemed to absorb light, had dared to question his projected timeline, not with insolence, but with unassailable data showing a flaw in the structural phasing he'd approved months prior. He had dismissed her curtly, a brief, dismissive wave of his hand, expecting compliance, but she hadn't backed down immediately. She'd held his gaze for a fraction of a second too long, a quiet tenacity that had momentarily stalled his retort before she offered a succinct, with respect, "Mr. Thorne, the structural integrity of sector for requires a revised timeline, or we risk catastrophic failure." He'd felt a flicker of annoyance. Not because she was wrong, she wasn't, but because she had forced him to admit, even internally, that he had overlooked something, a tiny crack in his infallible armor. He'd signed off on the revised plan later that day, never acknowledging her again publicly, but the impression remained a speck of grit in his perfectly oiled machinery. Now, the irritation resurfaced because Elara had submitted a proposal for the landscaping and aesthetic overhaul of the executive floor, a space usually handled by high-end, established firms with exorbitant fees, a task Alistair had assigned almost as a tedious afterthought, expecting a safe, expensive, and utterly bland submission. Instead, Elara had delivered something radical, a design based not on sterile modernism, but on incorporating living, breathing natural elements. A miniature urban forest meant to purify the air and somehow, impossibly, soften the harsh lines of his empire. His chief operating officer, Marcus Vance, no relation, thankfully, Alistair often thought, noting Elara's inconveniently common surname, had looked faintly alarmed when presenting the schematic. "Sir, it's unconventional. The cost overrun is minimal, surprisingly, but the concept a full atrium greenhouse on the 40th floor, it requires structural rethinking." Alistair leaned back in his custom-made leather chair, the city lights blurring behind him, his gaze fixed on the rendering of hanging mosses and soaring indoor ferns that Elara had submitted. Unconventional how, Marcus, his voice was low, dangerous. It suggests a connection to nature, Mr. Thorne. A softening of the corporate image. It's human. The word human struck Alistair like a physical blow. He hadn't cultivated an image of humanity, he had cultivated an image of untouchable dominance. He wanted efficiency, not empathy reflected in the office decor. He ordered Marcus to reject the proposal summarily and assign the task to Sterling and Associates, the most expensive, most predictable firm in the tri-state area. Marcus hesitated, a rare occurrence. She's already implemented phase 1 of the preliminary schematics in her own workspace, sir, on her own dime. It's a small alcove near the West Wing drafting tables. I noticed it during the security sweep. That evening, against every instinct that dictated he should remain sequestered in his tower, Alistair found himself descending 40 floors. Driven by a compulsion, he couldn't name perhaps simple verification, or perhaps a need to crush this budding rebellion before it spread. He navigated the familiar, silent, polished hallways until he reached the West Wing, a domain usually buzzing with the lower-tier staff, now quiet as the cleaning crew began their rounds. He found the alcove, a recessed area near the emergency stairs. It wasn't grand. It was small, a former storage nook. But inside, the air was different. It smelled of damp earth, ozone, and something faintly floral. Elara hadn't built an atrium, she had cultivated a miniature sanctuary. A single, tall, twisting Japanese maple sapling stood in a large, cleverly disguised planter, its leaves already catching the ambient fluorescent light with an unexpected warmth. Small, smooth river stones lined the edges, and a tiny, almost silent water feature trickled into a basin made of reclaimed slate. He stepped into the space, violating the sterile perimeter of the hallway, and for the first time in years, Alistair Thorne felt the weight of his own rigidity. He stood there, encased in his bespoke Italian wool, an intruder in this small pocket of untamed life, watching the tiny water ripple. Then a sound. A soft sigh followed by the rustle of paper. Elara was there, working late, hunched over a drafting table she'd managed to squeeze into the nook, her concentration absolute. She didn't look up immediately, assuming he was maintenance. "Excuse me," she murmured, her voice softer than it had been in the boardroom. "I'll be just a moment. I'm just finalizing the stress calculations for the tertiary supports." When she finally looked up, her eyes widened, not in fear, but in a momentary shock that quickly morphed into that familiar, unnerving composure. She stood up, instinctively trying to shield her illegal, unauthorized garden. "Mr. Thorne," she managed, her voice tight. "I apologize. I wasn't aware I'll have this cleared out by morning." Alistair found himself surprisingly unable to deliver the expected execution order. He merely gestured toward the small tree. "This is your revision for the executive floor." "No, sir," Elara replied, clutching a rolled blueprint like a shield. "This is a stress test, a proof of concept for microclimate integration. It's purely experimental." "And the cost?" he asked, his tone flat, searching for the transgression. "Minimal, sir. I sourced the materials myself, second-hand where possible. The stones from a riverbed clearance project downtown. The maple was a sapling at risk of being paved over for a parking lot." He walked closer, inspecting the workmanship. It was meticulous, honest, and imbued with a care that shocked him. He was used to paying fortunes for sterile perfection. Here was flawed, vibrant reality offered almost for free. "You spent your own time and money on this," he stated, stating the obvious, but really asking why. Elara met his gaze, the hazel flecked with gold under the harsh light. "I believe in the concept, Mr. Thorne. I believe that the places where we work define how we think. If you spend 12 hours a day surrounded by glass and still reflecting only your own ambition, you forget that the world outside exists, and eventually, you forget how to breathe the air. The sheer audacity of her lecture, delivered in his own company's hallway, should have resulted in her immediate termination. Instead, Alistair felt a strange, almost physical lightness. "Clear it out," he said, his voice barely a breath. Elara nodded stiffly, already anticipating the axe. "Yes, Mr. Thorne." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway, the scent of the damp earth clinging to his expensive suit. "Wait." She froze. "Show me the full proposal for the executive floor," he commanded, turning back just enough so she could see the silhouette of his rigid posture. "Don't send Marcus. Bring it to my private office. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. sharp." Elara's eyes registered confusion, then a flicker of hope so swift it was nearly invisible. "Yes, Mr. Thorne." The next morning, Alistair sat in his office, the city temporarily silenced by the early fog, waiting for 9 a.m. He despised punctuality, yet he found himself watching the clock with an unusual intensity. When Elara arrived, she wore the same severe clothes, but there was a subtle difference, a faint dusting of soil, perhaps, or maybe just the lingering impression of her secret garden. She carried a single, slim portfolio, no more extravagant than necessary. She didn't set it on the enormous, uncluttered mahogany desk. Instead, she placed it carefully on the low conference table near the window. "Good morning, sir." "Morning, Vance." He didn't invite her to sit. Elara opened the portfolio, revealing not just architectural drawings, but watercolor studies, material samples, polished river stones next to sheaves of dried lavender, sketches of light diffusion through overlapping leaves. "The core problem with the initial atrium concept, Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice now infused with the authority of expertise, "is scale versus psychological impact. A large greenhouse indoors is maintenance. A strategically placed, intensely focused microecosystem is a sanctuary. I propose removing the north-facing partition wall entirely as load-bearing, but we can install a reinforced glass curtain wall instead, opening the entire corner suite to the eastern light. We then create a tiered, cascading installation of hardy, low-maintenance botanicals that mimic a natural cliff face, complete with controlled humidity and an automated nutrient dispersal system modeled after underground root networks." Alistair listened, mesmerized, not just by the design, but by the way her hands moved as she pointed out details, precise, graceful, passionate. She wasn't selling him a product, she was describing a necessary transformation. "And the cost?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost a conscious effort to keep it level. "The materials are efficient, sir. The primary cost is the structural modification, which will temporarily delay the occupancy of that wing by 3 weeks. However," she paused, offering a small, unexpected smile, "the resulting gain in executive well-being, air quality, and if I may be so bold, the PR advantage of having a genuinely groundbreaking, sustainable executive space far outweighs the initial investment. It shifts the narrative from acquisition to stewardship." Stewardship, a word Alistair Thorne had never associated with himself. He looked out at the fog, then back at Elara, seeing past the severe bun and the sensible blouse to the vibrant intellect beneath. He had built his world on control. She was proposing a world built on growth. The sterling proposal, he stated, watching her carefully, was predictable. "Expensive. Safe." "Safe rarely leads to legacy, sir," Elara countered, the boldness returning, yet tempered with respect. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the city traffic far below. Alistair made a decision that contradicted every established protocol of his career. "Implement your design, Vance. With full budget. I want it finished in 6 weeks, not 7. And I want weekly progress reports delivered to me personally." Elara blinked, the hazel eyes wide. "Sir, that is a significant commitment of resources." "I am aware," he said, leaning forward, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. I want to see how far you can push this. I want to see if you can build something as permanent as my steel, but as alive as that." He nodded towards her portfolio's sketch of the moss wall. And so began the strange, almost covert collaboration. Elara began spending more time on the 40th floor, initially coordinating with the structural engineers, then overseeing the specialized installation crews. Alistair, claiming intense interest in sustainability metrics, found himself subtly restructuring his schedule so that he would often be in his office during the peak construction hours. He learned trivial things. She drank black coffee, despised elevators if he wasn't in them, and always listened to classical cello music through noise-cancelling headphones when drafting late. He learned she was not afraid of hard physical labor. He once walked in to find her, surprisingly strong, helping a technician maneuver a heavy drainage pipe into place. Her face smudged with concrete dust, looking fiercely beautiful in her focused effort. The scorn he initially felt, the arrogance of a titan dismissing a clerk, had evaporated, replaced by a simmering, confusing respect, which in turn began to mutate into something hotter, more volatile. Something that made his chest feel tight when she accidentally brushed his arm while passing him a complex structural schematic. One evening, 3 weeks into the project, Alistair found her sitting alone in the half-finished atrium space. The eastern glass wall was in place, bathing the skeletal framework of the garden in a glorious, premature sunrise glow. She was staring out at the untouched cityscape, a posture of quiet contemplation that looked profoundly out of place in the hyper-efficient Thorne Tower. He approached quietly. "Vance." She turned, a soft, almost tired smile touching her lips. "Mr. Thorne. I just wanted to see how the light hit it before the botanicals obscure the view entirely." "It's perfect." "You look exhausted," he noted, stepping closer, observing the dark smudges beneath her eyes. "It's complex," she admitted, rubbing the back of her neck. "The humidity controls are proving temperamental. It requires constant calibration." "Why are you doing this yourself?" "Hire a specialist." "Specialists are expensive, sir," she repeated her earlier mantra, but this time it carried the weariness of real sacrifice. "And they don't understand the vision. I need this to be right." Alistair looked around the vast, empty expanse of the executive office, then back at the nascent garden, a space no larger than his private dining room, yet containing more life than the rest of the building combined. He felt a fierce, protective instinct rise up for this small, vulnerable creation, and for the woman who poured herself into it. "My driver can take you home," he said abruptly, not asking. Elara was taken aback. "That's unnecessary, sir. I can take the subway." "You look like you haven't slept in 48 hours, Alistair countered, his voice dangerously even. "I require my chief designer to be functional. Go home. Rest. If the system fails overnight, it will be fixed by professionals tomorrow. You have earned the right to delegate." The unexpected kindness, delivered without sentimentality, struck her hard. Her composure wavered, her eyes grew suspiciously bright. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." As he watched her walk away, her shoulders rigid with professional distance, Alistair realized the profound, unsettling nature of his fascination. He, who viewed every relationship as a transaction, found himself investing time, attention, and emotional energy into someone who offered him nothing tangible in return except the product of her skill. He wasn't buying her, he was being drawn in by her essence. The scorn was completely gone, replaced by a burning need to protect her, to understand the complex blueprint of her soul. The opening of the Thorne atrium was a quiet affair, largely internal, a showcase for board members and key investors. When the silk ropes dropped, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The air in the executive suite was cleaner, sharper, infused with the subtle, earthy perfume of living growth. The light filtering through the layered greenery was soft, non-glaring, casting dappled shadows that transformed the stark mahogany walls into something warm and inviting. Alistair stood near the centerpiece, a waterfall feature she had engineered from recycled rainwater, watching the reactions. People lingered, they breathed deeper. For the first time since he'd occupied the space, the atmosphere felt less like a fortress and more like a sanctuary. He saw Elara across the room, standing near the periphery, looking utterly uncomfortable in the spotlight she had inadvertently created. She was watching him, gauging his reaction with visible tension. He walked toward her, ignoring the murmurs of praise directed his way. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that the scent of her subtle lavender and paper was distinct over the damp earth. "It is exceptional, Vance," he stated, his voice low so only she could hear. A genuine, unrestrained smile bloomed on Elara's face, transforming her features from severe professionalism to stunning beauty. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne. It was worth the fight." "Indeed," he murmured, realizing that in this small, enclosed ecosystem she was the vibrant, necessary life source. "The structural report is complete. The figures are astonishing, Marcus tells me. Employee satisfaction is up 7% since the installation began, correlating directly with reported stress levels." "Good design should serve function, sir," she replied, her eyes shining with pride. "It does," Alistair agreed. He paused, sensing the moment a precipice where professional boundaries dissolved entirely. "I want you to supervise the next phase of the entire complex overhaul. Design integration, not just logistics. You will report only to me. Your new office will be adjacent to the atrium." Elara's smile faded, replaced by wary caution. "Mr. Thorne, I appreciate the promotion, but I don't wish to be tethered to your personal space. I work better where I can." "You will be tethered where I can see you," he interrupted, the billionaire's raw possessiveness surging forward, but this time, it wasn't about ownership of assets, it was about proximity to something vital. "You have disrupted my order, Vance. Now you will be part of it. I am done pretending this is about spreadsheets." The air thickened. Elara stepped back slightly, her expression guarded. "I don't understand what this is about, sir." "It is about the fact," Alistair said, leaning in, his glacier eyes burning with an intensity she'd never witnessed, "that for the first time in a decade, I look forward to coming to work. And it is entirely because of the chaos you insist on bringing into my sterile environment." He expected resistance, perhaps indignation. Instead, Elara looked deeply into his eyes, searching for the familiar facade of the ruthless CEO, but finding only an unnerving vulnerability layered beneath the ice. "Mr. Thorne," she began slowly, "I designed a space to breathe. I didn't design a relationship." "Perhaps," Alistair countered, his voice dropping to a husky register that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine, "you should consider designing that too. I'm offering you a new brief, Vance. Let's see what you can build when the stakes are personal." He gave her no chance to answer, simply turning away to address a nervous-looking investor, leaving Elara standing amidst the lush greenery, the scent of ozone and earth surrounding her. Her carefully constructed professional wall suddenly porous, letting in the unfamiliar, terrifying warmth of Alistair Thorne's focused attention. The following weeks were a tightrope walk. Elara accepted the promotion, realizing that refusing it would mean abandoning the very platform she needed to implement her larger sustainability goals for the company. She moved into the sleek, glass-walled office next to the atrium, a space that felt both exposed and curiously intimate. Alistair was relentless in his attention. He didn't woo her with flowers or extravagant dinners, he wooed her with complex engineering problems, demanding her opinion on everything from infrastructure financing to the tensile strength of new composite materials. He was using his power to engage her mind, testing the limits of her intellect, and in doing so, revealing his own vast, strategic landscape that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He learned she was supporting her ailing mother in a subsidized apartment across town, pouring most of her salary into specialized care. This small detail, discovered through a discreet security check, a habit Alistair couldn't shake, though he promised himself it was only for corporate security, infuriated him. He despised seeing talent constrained by necessity. One Thursday, Elara was struggling with a particularly dense structural blueprint when Alistair entered her office without knocking, a growing habit that she was starting to both dread and anticipate. "That foundation specification is flawed," he stated, not looking at her, but pointing a long, decisive finger at a complex rendering on her screen. The soil composition reports from Q3 indicated higher hydrostatic pressure near the riverbed than the engineers accounted for in this stress model. Elara frowned, pulling up the ancillary reports. He was right. Again, I missed that cross-reference. Thank you. You are tired, Alistair said, moving around her desk, his presence suddenly overwhelming the small space. He placed a slim, embossed check on her desk. Elara looked down at the amount. It was an exorbitant, life-changing sum, far exceeding the cost of the best private care available. "Mr. Thorne, I cannot accept this. This is charity." "It is not charity," Alistair corrected, his voice low, heavy with conviction. "It is compensation for the intellectual cost of your distraction. You spend too much mental energy worrying about your mother's comfort. I am purchasing your complete, undivided focus for Thorne Industries. Consider it an advance on performance bonuses payable directly to the caregiver of your choice." "You are trying to buy me off," Elara whispered, a flash of the old defiance returning. "To remove the obstacles that keep me grounded." "I am removing the friction," Alistair conceded, leaning his knuckles on the desk, bringing his face close to hers, his glacial eyes now holding a deep, unsettling heat. "I don't want you grounded, Vance. I want you soaring. And I want to be the one who engineered the lift." His directness was shattering. She had built walls of professionalism, but he was dismantling them brick by agonizing brick, not by tearing them down, but by building something so compelling around them that the walls became irrelevant. "What happens when I'm no longer distracted?" she challenged, her heart hammering against her ribs. "When I'm only focused on your firm. What do you want then?" Alistair reached out, his large, warm hand tentatively cupping her cheek, the stark contrast of his controlled power against her fragile skin electrifying the space between them. "Then, Elara," he used her first name for the first time, the sound feeling alien and deeply significant. "I will want you to look at me the way you look at that dying maple sapling when you think no one is watching, with fierce, protective hope." He didn't kiss her. He simply held her gaze, an open challenge, an undeniable claim. Elara felt the carefully constructed scorn she had once held for this monolithic man finally crumble, revealing not the villain she expected, but a profound loneliness she recognized in herself. He was starved for authenticity, and she, accidentally, had provided the first taste. She leaned into his touch, a surrender that was more intellectual acknowledgement than physical collapse. "The risk with hope, Alistair," she murmured, using his name back, "is that if it fails, the collapse is catastrophic." "I deal in risk," he said, his thumb brushing her jawline. "And I assure you, I never allow my foundations to fail." The relationship that followed was as unconventional and intense as the atrium itself. It existed in stolen moments between board meetings, in late-night strategy sessions where the city light served as their only witness, and in the quiet, shared observation of the thriving greenery in their shared space. Alistair Thorne learned to shed the layers of corporate armor with her, revealing a man deeply scarred by early betrayal of forgotten childhood poverty. A ruthless climb fueled by the need to never be powerless again. Elara, in turn, felt safe enough to let down her guard. She discovered his hidden generosity, the anonymous funding for struggling students in the engineering program, the quiet purchase of failing local businesses just to maintain jobs in a neighborhood he secretly considered home. He was a contradiction, a shark who cultivated a private ecosystem. The physical intimacy, when it finally arrived, was less a conquest and more a profound, hesitant discovery. Alistair, so commanding in the boardroom, was surprisingly tentative, almost reverent with her body. He sought permission, not dominance. He discovered that Elara's passion was as deep and focused as her intelligence, transforming the cool titan into a man capable of surprising tenderness. Their contrasting worlds collided violently 6 months later, not because of external threats, but because of internal pride. A major acquisition, the hostile takeover of Omnicorp, a legacy firm holding crucial patents Alistair needed, was underway. The CEO of Omnicorp, a traditionalist named Harrington, was fighting viciously, resorting to corporate espionage and smear tactics. One evening, during a particularly tense negotiation session at Omnicorp's downtown headquarters, Harrington played his trump card. A carefully curated dossier designed to discredit Alistair by attacking his perceived weakness, Elara. The dossier detailed their entire history, their legal landscaping, the suspiciously generous payment for her mother's care, framing it as blatant insider trading and nepotism, concluding with deeply personal, speculative attacks on Elara's moral character, suggesting she was nothing more than a highly paid mistress used to soften Alistair's image. Alistair received the packet via encrypted courier an hour before the final meeting. He walked into Elara's office, the documents crumpled in his white-knuckled fist. The vibrant greens of the atrium seemed to mock the blackness radiating off him. Elara looked up, instantly recognizing the storm. "What is it?" He threw the packet onto her desk. "Harrington. He's gone too far. He's attacking you." Elara picked up the papers, her face draining of color as she read the venomous accusations, particularly the insinuations about the payment to her mother. "He twisted everything," she whispered, horrified, not by the lies about their relationship, but by the cynical manipulation of her family's necessity. "He questioned your worth," Alistair growled, pacing the small office like a caged predator. "He suggested that everything you achieved here was based on proximity." "And you believe him?" Elara asked, her voice dangerously quiet, the hazel eyes suddenly hard, mirroring the eyes he used to wear. Alistair stopped pacing, momentarily stunned by the accusation. "Elara, I built this empire based on data, on verified facts. I have the proof that your structural work is flawless. I know what you built here. But this is dirty, professional warfare. He's trying to break my resolve by attacking what I value." "And what do you value, Alistair?" she challenged, standing up to face him. "Is it the stability of your stock price, or is it the integrity of the person who made your executive floor habitable? If you can look at these papers, these lies, and still see only a distraction that needs managing, then you never saw me at all. You only saw a tool." The words pierced deeper than Harrington's entire dossier. Alistair had been so focused on protecting his investment in her focus, her genius, that he hadn't fully acknowledged the depth of his own regard for her personhood, separate from her output. He had treated her initial struggles as an engineering problem to be solved with capital, and now, confronted with the accusation of treating her as a mistress, he realized how close his actions had come to confirming the slander. "I value you," Alistair said, his voice strained, raw. "I value your mind, your spirit, the way you see the world in terms of growth where I only saw profit margins. I paid for your mother's care because I could, because your worry was inhibiting your brilliance, and I demand brilliance. But I never asked for repayment, Elara. I never demanded anything but your presence." "Presence isn't love, Alistair," she shot back, tears finally stinging her eyes. "And I refuse to be a weapon in your corporate battles, a trophy to prove you can acquire authenticity. If you are going into that final meeting, you go in knowing that I earn my place here every day, regardless of your acquisitions." She walked past him, heading toward the door, intending to leave the tower, to put miles between them until he sorted his monstrous priorities. "If you walk out that door," Alistair said, his voice trembling with a rare, genuine fear, "you are proving Harrington right. You are proving that the first serious threat, the first ugly stain of reality, is enough to make you run back to the shadows." Elara stopped, her hand on the cool metal of the door handle. She turned slowly, her expression desolate. "And if I stay, am I proving that I can be bought? That the price of my mother's comfort is my silence?" Alistair didn't move towards her. He stood his ground, radiating rigid control, but his eyes were pleading. "Stay," he said, the words sounding impossibly small in the vast office. "Stay and fight this with me. Not as my employee, not as my dependent, but as my partner. Let's dismantle Harrington together, using everything you and I have built here." He looked around the atrium, at the living proof of their shared vision. "If I am a shark, Elara, then you are the tide that brings the rich nutrients into my territory. I need you to survive, not just thrive. I scorned vulnerability, and you showed me its strength. Now, trust that I know the value of what I have found." Elara looked at the crumpled dossier, the ugly evidence of the world outside their sanctuary. Then she looked at Alistair, seeing not the ruthless billionaire, but the man terrified of losing the only beautiful thing he had ever cultivated without an acquisition strategy. Slowly, she let go of the door handle. She walked back to her desk, picked up the dossier, and methodically tore it into tiny strips, dropping them into the waste bin. "Omnicorp patents," she said, her voice firming, reclaiming her professional edge, but laced now with a shared purpose. "What are their weak points in the utility infrastructure? Harrington built his company on rapid deployment, not long-term resilience. We exploit the maintenance lag." Alistair Thorne watched her, the fear receding, replaced by a surge of pure, exhilarated partnership. The ice in his eyes thawed, revealing the startling blue beneath. He walked around the desk, no longer needing to lean or approach tentatively. He stood behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders, his grip grounding, not restraining. "I knew you wouldn't run," he murmured against her hair, the scent of earth and blossoms wrapping around him like a welcome embrace. "The design is sound, Elara. The structure will hold." They didn't just win the Omnicorp takeover, they dismantled Harrington's defense strategy with surgical precision, using Elara's understanding of resilient infrastructure against his brittle, rapidly expanded network. By dawn, Harrington was defeated, his company integrated into Thorne Industries, the patents secured. In the aftermath, Alistair held the final celebratory dinner, not in a sterile corporate dining room, but in the atrium itself. He had draped soft lighting among the branches, and the air was rich with the scent of night-blooming jasmine that Elara had insisted on installing despite the logistical challenge. He stood before the assembled board members, Elara beside him, her presence acknowledged not as an appendage, but as an equal pillar of his success. "Gentlemen," Alistair began, his voice ringing with authority, "today we absorbed Omnicorp. It was not done through brute force, but through intelligent integration. I learned long ago that taking everything you see leads to unsustainable growth. You must cultivate what you take, you must nurture the life within the structure." He turned to Elara, taking her hand, his grip firm and proprietary, but entirely loving. "When I met Elara Vance, I viewed her as an unpredictable variable in my clean equations. I scorned her gentle approach, but she taught me that true strength is not in steel, but in resilience, not in control, but in growth." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a gesture that shocked the hardened executives present. "Elara Vance is not my employee, not anymore," Alistair announced, the declaration echoing in the hushed space filled with living things. "She is my partner." And the next phase of Thorne Industries will be built on the principles she taught me: sustainability, connection, and uncompromising beauty. Elara looked up at him. The years of ambition, the cold calculations, the relentless drive, it all seemed to coalesce into this single moment of profound, acknowledged love. He hadn't just found a love interest, he had fundamentally redesigned his own heart, moving the cold core to make room for the vibrant, resilient garden she represented. The billionaire, who once ruled only through acquisition, had finally learned the far more valuable art of cultivation. Later that night, long after the board members had departed, Alistair led Elara not to his penthouse bedroom, but back to the atrium. The city lights below seemed distant, irrelevant. He stood with her beneath the Japanese maple, the soft trickle of the recycled water their only soundtrack. I designed a life for myself based on the principle that if I controlled everything, I could never be hurt again, Alistair confessed, pulling her close, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of earth and life. I scorned vulnerability. But you, Elara, you are the most vulnerable, powerful thing I have ever encountered. And I choose to protect that vulnerability with everything I have. Elara wrapped her arms around his neck, anchoring the powerful man. You learned to breathe, Alistair. That's all I ever wanted. To build something real where we could both finally draw a full breath. He looked down at her, the ice entirely gone from his gaze, replaced by a consuming warmth. He didn't need to acquire her, he needed to inhabit the world she built with him. Alistair Thorne, the master of hostile takeovers, finally understood that the greatest wealth was not in owning the skyline, but in sharing the living space beneath it. He kissed her then, a kiss that held the memory of boardroom arguments, the scent of damp earth, the thrill of shared triumph, and the quiet, certain promise of a love built not on foundations of steel, but on the unshakable, resilient hope of growth. The fortress heart had finally yielded, transformed into a thriving, self-sustaining sanctuary built from scorn, rooted in respect, and blooming into enduring love.